Hey guys, and welcome to this education episode on biotech investing basics brought to you by the Amp Bioresearch team. In this presentation, we're going to be touching on the clinical research and its associated phases, the various regulatory bodies, commercial landscape, financial overview for these biotech companies, as well as the many possible risks that need to be accounted for. So let's jump right into it. First, we have the clinical research and its associated phases. So following preclinical research, clinical research is the first time the drug is tested in humans. Preclinical research is things like animal models, and clinical research is the first time the drug is tested in humans. Clinical research is separated into three distinct phases, and to begin testing, companies must submit an investigational new drug IND application and have it accepted. The three clinical stages are broken down into phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 1, the safety and dosing is tested in a small number of healthy volunteers. In phase 2, safety and various doses are tested in a small group of diseased patients. And in phase 3, safety and efficacy are validated in a large group of diseased patients. And these are just general guidelines. It's never set in stone. It can vary based on things like the indication that the drug is going after. But generally, phase 1 is in a small number of healthy volunteers looking at PK and PD data as well as safety. Phase 2 is the first time it's in diseased patients, testing various doses to see which doses or dose they should move forward with into the phase 3, which is a large-scale trial looking at safety and efficacy in a large group of diseased patients to validate for approval. So those are the clinical stages, and then data is released to the public. These public companies do release the clinical trial data via press releases or company presentations or at healthcare meetings, and they can have a large upside or downside for the company since they're products that have potential for generating large amounts of revenue, so they can have a large upside or downside for the company based on the trial results. And here, this is a nice graphic from RBC Capital, just over the clinical stage outline. You can see it from drug discovery all the way up to phase 1, 2, 3 for review and hopefully for approval. On the right there, they give general timelines for each stage or each phase. And on the left, they have their odds of approval and probability of success through each phase. Now, these are their numbers, but they can be a good general guideline. The key may come from being able to create your own probability of success through each phase for each specific drug that may be able to give you a little bit of an edge in the market. But that's for a later time. This is just a good overview. So that was it for clinical stage. Now let's move into the regulatory environment, the governing bodies of biotech, or the gatekeepers, so to speak. So in this presentation, we're going to be going over the two main ones, FDA in the US and the EMA in Europe. There's also Chinese regulatory body that's pretty large, but in this presentation, we're just going to be talking about the FDA in US and the EMA in Europe. And so major regulatory factors for approval that these agencies look at when they're looking to approve a drug are safety, efficacy, and the current standard of care. So safety, obviously better safety is preferred, but it is weighed alongside efficacy and standard of care. And that's a common theme that you will see for safety and efficacy, is that nothing is set in stone. It's all comparative to each other, and it's sort of a sliding scale. So for safety, better safety is preferred, but it's weighed alongside the efficacy and the current standard of care. For efficacy, the threshold for necessary efficacy to warrant approval depends on the current standard of care. If there currently is nothing that's working to treat these patients, then that threshold may be lower. If there's currently a lot of drugs on the market or the standard of care is working really well, then that threshold may be higher. And then there is the standard of care. So depending on how many and how well the drugs on the market are working and the number of drugs that are available, that comes into play as well. So there's all these factors. This is just very top level. There's a lot of other factors as well, but these are the three main ones that the regulatory agencies look at for approval. And there's FDA designations that they can give to drugs to sort of help them get through this development process quicker. These are usually given to drugs that they see as being, very beneficial or very effective or treating an unmet need or a small population. You can get fast track designation, which expedites the FDA review and drug development time. Breakthrough therapy has all the features of fast track plus more meetings and more interactions with the FDA. There's accelerated approval, which shortens the review time to approve a drug. There's orphan drug status, which incentivizes companies to go after these orphan and rare diseases, which have small patient populations. Priority review, the FDA aims to complete the review in 6 months versus the traditional 10 months. And the EMA equivalents, the EMA has their own names for each designation above, but they have similar designations, just named differently. So that was the regulatory landscape. Now we're looking at the commercial environment and dynamics for these biotech companies. There's 3 major commercial factors these companies take into account. Differentiation, right? The product, the drug needs to be differentiated in some way from the current standard of care, whether that's better efficacy, safety, easier to administer, whatever it may be, or serve an unmet need. So if there currently isn't a sufficient standard of care, they may target that indication, and having a product that works where there's an unmet need is another factor for commercial success. And third, it needs to be payer friendly, right? It needs to fit into the complex payment flow of biotech products, right? There's insurance companies, there's pharmacies, there's the patients, there's the biotech companies, there's a lot of players. So it needs to fit into this flow nicely. And this is an overview of drug pricing dynamics, so sort of how you can expect drugs to be priced. You see on the left, if there's a small number of patients, these are things like orphan or rare diseases or one-time treatments, such as gene therapy. Those drugs and those treatments can have a high price tag because they need to in order to survive in those markets and be beneficial to the company. And on the flip side, if there's a large number of patients or it's a big market with competitors and pricing competition, then the price of the drug will be lower. And then there's this big scale in between. So this was just a general overview of how companies can price their drugs and how you can sort of estimate drug pricing. And this is that payment flow that we talked about a couple slides ago, and how biotech companies need to try and fit their products into this complex flow. You can see in the top left, you have the biotech company. In the bottom right, you have the patient. And so with other industries, generally you have the company and the consumer exchanging the good or service for the payment. But for biotech companies, you could see that it's complex. You have in the top right the payer, the insurance company, the healthcare provider, and you have the pharmacy benefit manager. So there's a lot that has to flow, a lot of flow and movement between the biotech company and the patient, so it needs to be able to fit into this structure here. So now moving on to the financial tendencies for these companies, I like to break it down into 3 overall phases that these companies go through. So first, R&D, they're developing these drugs, so they're spending a lot on research and development to be able to move through the clinical trials, develop these drugs. So they're spending a lot on R&D, and they have limited or no revenue. They're operating at a loss. They're burning through cash. And then they move into phase 2, where they have possibly an approved product. They may be a target for acquisition. And if the product does get approved, then they can start to generate some revenue. And then they move into that third phase, where they may have 1 or more approved products. Their SG&A starts to increase as they have to hire a larger sales force and more faculty. And their R&D may decrease as more of their drugs make it through the clinic and become commercial products. And so at that point, they're generating revenue, they're growing SG&A, growing revenue, and their R&D is possibly decreasing. And so this is just a graphical representation of that. You can see we have R&D spend, SG&A spend, and then revenue. And so in phase 1, they're spending a whole lot on R&D, a small amount on SG&A, and they're not generating any revenue. This is when they're going through the clinical trials. Then we move into phase 2, where the product may have just been approved and their R&D spend goes down a bit as they're not spending so much on that drug in clinical trials anymore. Their SG&A spend goes up as they're hiring a sales force to sell that product, and they're beginning to generate a little bit of revenue. Then they move into phase 3. Say another one of their drugs gets approved, so now they have a few drugs on the market. Their R&D spend goes down even more as they have less drugs left in the clinic and more on the market being sold, and their SG&A goes up even more because now they need even larger sales force to go out and sell all these various drugs. So that's just a general overview of how the finances for these companies look. Now, if we talk about some major risks to identify or look at for these companies, it's always good to go through and check out all of these risks, because these are just some of the common risks that biotech companies could be facing. They could be facing efficacy or safety issues if the drug isn't efficacious or has safety concerns. That's never a good thing. Competitive risk, right? What drugs are being developed, what competitors are out there. The regulatory and FDA uncertainty, right? Will the drug be approved? Stuff like that. Legal battles and risks, right? What does the IP landscape look like for that product? Capital and dilution factor, since these companies are burning through cash for a lot of their early on lifespan, they are always at risk for dilution because they need to, fund these R&D, these clinical studies. So they're burning through cash. They need to dilute and raise capital quite frequently, so that's always a risk. Then there's the commercial and market size risk, right? Is the commercial size worth pursuing? And then there's the political and government legislation. That's just an overhanging sort of risk to the overall biotech sector, but also to specific indications possibly in companies. So with that, I wanted to say thank you for listening to this presentation. Hopefully you were able to learn some good things about biotech investing and biotech companies. We wanted to say thanks from the AMP team, myself, Dom Vacchiano, and our AMP founder, Manny Vacchiano. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and email me, dom@ampbioresearch.com. And if you are interested in learning more about biotech investing or using some of our tools, you can visit our website, www.ampbioresearch.com. We have our AMP Catalyst watch list, as well as the Premier AMP Biotech Investing Forum, where we post Catalyst updates and previous data and other information for upcoming catalysts, all into one easy to find post. So it can be very helpful for your biotech investing needs. And with that, I wanted to say thank you and stay green.